10 years had passed since Emily Dawson last allowed herself to think about her brother Daniel. Life had moved on, or so she told herself. She was now in her early 30s, living alone in a small, quiet town, far from the place she once called home. The memories of Daniel were tucked away in the corners of her mind, buried under layers of time and forced forgetfulness. But some wounds never truly heal, no matter how much you try to ignore them. For Emily, Daniel's absence was like a shadow that followed her everywhere, always present, always lingering. Daniel had been more than just a brother. He was her best friend, her confidant, her protector. Growing up, they shared everything: their laughter, their secrets, even their dreams. They had built a treehouse together when they were kids, a little wooden fortress hidden among the branches where they would spend hours talking about life and imagining futures that seemed so bright. Back then, Daniel was the kind of person who could light up any room he walked into. His smile was infectious, his energy unstoppable. Everyone loved him, including Emily. But 10 years ago, everything changed. One day, Daniel went out for what was supposed to be a peaceful hike along the cliffs near their hometown. He never came back. The authorities said it was an accident, a tragic fall from the edge of the cliff. No one questioned it at first. Accidents happen, after all. But as the days turned into weeks, something felt off. The funeral was rushed, almost secretive. Their parents didn't want anyone asking too many questions. All of Daniel's belongings disappeared shortly afterward. His clothes, his books, even the photographs of him were gone. It was as if they were trying to erase him completely. Emily tried to ask about it once. "Why are we getting rid of everything?" she had demanded, tears streaming down her face as she watched her mother pack Daniel's favorite jacket into a garbage bag. Her mother had simply shaken her head and said, "It's better this way." When Emily pressed further, her father snapped, "Don't bring him up again, ever." That was the last time anyone in the family spoke Daniel's name aloud. Over the years, Emily learned to live with the silence. She moved away from home, hoping distance would dull the ache in her heart. It didn't. Instead, it festered, growing heavier with each passing year. There were moments when she thought she saw him, someone walking down the street whose posture reminded her of him, or a voice in a crowded cafe that sounded eerily familiar. Each time, her pulse quickened, but reality always slapped her back into place. Daniel was gone. Or was he? One evening, as Emily sat sipping tea in her tiny apartment, there was a knock at the door. She wasn't expecting anyone, and her heart skipped a beat. Peering through the peephole, she saw nothing but an empty hallway. Confused, she opened the door and found an envelope lying on the floor. There was no return address, no stamp, just her name written neatly in black ink. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 2 words scrawled across it: "Open it." Her hands trembled as she read those words over and over again. Who sent this? And what did it mean? The phrase gnawed at her, refusing to let go. Open what? The possibilities swirled in her mind, but deep down she already knew. The sender was talking about Daniel's coffin. For days, Emily wrestled with herself. Was this some cruel prank? A trick meant to reopen old wounds? Or was it real, a clue, to a truth she'd been too afraid to confront? Sleep eluded her as images of Daniel flooded her thoughts. What if he hadn't really died? What if there was more to his story than what everyone believed? The idea was absurd, yet it refused to leave her alone. Finally, she made up her mind. She had to know. Whatever the cost, whatever the truth might be, she couldn't keep running from it anymore. The decision weighed heavily on her as she packed a bag and booked a ticket to her hometown. The prospect of returning filled her with dread. She hadn't stepped foot in that town since leaving for college, and the thought of facing the ghosts of her past was terrifying. Still, something inside her pushed forward, a mix of curiosity, hope, and desperation. If there was even the slightest chance that Daniel was still alive, she owed it to him, and to herself, to find out. As the train rattled toward her destination, Emily stared out the window, watching the scenery blur past. Memories played in her mind like an old movie reel. She remembered the last time she saw Daniel before his supposed death. He had been acting strange, distant. At the time, she chalked it up to stress. He had been working long hours and seemed preoccupied. Looking back now, though, she wondered if there had been warning signs she missed. Had he known something was coming? Had he tried to tell her? When the train finally pulled into the station, Emily hesitated before stepping off. The air smelled different here. Familiar, yet foreign. Everything looked smaller than she remembered, as if the town itself had shrunk over the years. She hailed a taxi and gave the driver directions to the cemetery. As they drove, she clenched her fists in her lap, trying to steady her breathing. This was it. There was no turning back now. At the cemetery gates, she paid the driver and stepped out, her legs feeling like lead. The path to Daniel's grave felt impossibly long, every step heavier than the last. When she finally reached the headstone, she froze. It was covered in moss, neglected and forgotten just like the rest of him. Kneeling beside it, she traced her fingers over the engraved letters of his name. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision. For a moment, she considered leaving, convincing herself that this was madness. But then she remembered the note. Open it. Taking a deep breath, Emily stood and approached the caretaker's shed nearby. After borrowing a shovel and some tools, she returned to the grave. Her hands shook as she plunged the shovel into the earth, breaking the surface. Dirt flew up around her, each clump landing with a dull thud. Time lost meaning as she worked, driven by a force she couldn't explain. By the time she reached the coffin, sweat poured down her face, and her muscles screamed in protest. But none of that mattered. With trembling hands, she pried open the lid, bracing herself for whatever lay inside. What she found wasn't what she expected. Instead of Daniel's body, the coffin contained stacks of journals, photographs, and documents tied together with fraying string. Confusion washed over her as she sifted through the items, her heart racing. What did this mean? Why had these things been buried instead of Daniel? And most importantly, where was her brother? The sun was beginning to set as Emily stood over the open grave, her mind reeling from what she had just uncovered. The coffin wasn't empty. It was filled with journals, photographs, and documents tied together with fraying string. None of it made sense. Where was Daniel's body? Why had these items been buried instead of him? And who would go to such lengths to hide them? Emily's heart raced as she realized that this discovery was far bigger than she could have imagined. Her hands trembled as she gathered the contents of the coffin and placed them carefully into a bag she had brought along. She couldn't examine everything here in the fading light, so she decided to take it all back to her childhood home. Walking through the familiar streets of her hometown felt surreal. The houses looked smaller, the trees taller, and the air carried a strange weight of nostalgia mixed with unease. Everything around her seemed frozen in time, untouched by the years she'd spent away. But Emily wasn't the same person she used to be. She had returned not as the carefree girl who once laughed and played with her brother, but as someone burdened by unanswered questions and haunted by memories. When she arrived at her parents' house, the sight of it sent a pang through her chest. It was exactly as she remembered. White walls, a neatly trimmed garden, and the same creaky front door she used to race out of as a child. Her mother answered the door, looking surprised to see her daughter standing there after so many years. "Emily?" she said, her voice tinged with both confusion and guilt. "What are you doing here?" "I need answers," Emily replied firmly, brushing past her mother and stepping inside. The house smelled faintly of lavender, a scent that used to comfort her but now only heightened her anxiety. She walked straight to the kitchen table, dumping the contents of the bag onto it. Journals, photos, and papers spilled across the surface, creating a chaotic mess. Her mother froze in the doorway, her face pale. "Where did you get those?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "That doesn't matter right now." Emily shot back, her tone sharp. "What matters is why they were in Daniel's coffin instead of his body." Her mother didn't respond immediately. Instead, she sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. For a moment, The only sound in the room was the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Finally, her father appeared, drawn by the commotion. His expression darkened when he saw the items spread across the table. "We told you never to bring him up again," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. But Emily wasn't intimidated. Not anymore. "You lied to me," she said, her voice steady despite the anger boiling inside her. "Daniel isn't dead, is he? You hid him or something happened to him, and you've been keeping the truth from me for 10 years. Her father sighed heavily, running a hand through his graying hair. He glanced at her mother, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Whatever secret they had been guarding was about to come out, whether they liked it or not. "Sit down," her father said, pulling out a chair for himself. Emily hesitated but obeyed, her eyes locked on his face as if daring him to lie again. "Daniel didn't die in that accident," her father began, his voice heavy with regret. "He uncovered something dangerous. A group of people, they were involved in illegal activities, things we don't even want to think about. When Daniel found out, they threatened us. They said if we didn't cooperate, they would hurt him and us." Emily listened intently, her stomach churning. This wasn't just some random tragedy. It was a calculated act of deception. "We made a deal with them," her mother continued, tears streaming down her face. "They agreed to let Daniel live if we staged his death and sent him into hiding. We thought it was the only way to protect him. But—" Her voice trailed off, and she looked away, unable to meet Emily's gaze. "But what?" Emily pressed, her pulse quickening. "Where is he now?" Her father sighed again, this time with a note of defeat. "We don't know," he admitted. "After we sent him away, we stopped hearing from him. We assumed he was safe, that he was building a new life somewhere far from here. But as the years went by—" He paused, swallowing hard. "We started to worry. What if something happened to him? What if they found him?" Emily felt like the ground beneath her feet had shifted. All this time she had believed her brother was gone forever, that his death was final. Now she was facing the possibility that he might still be alive, but also that he could be in danger. The weight of it all threatened to crush her, but she pushed through, determined to piece together the rest of the puzzle. She picked up one of the journals from the table and flipped it open. Inside were pages upon pages of Daniel's handwriting, notes, sketches, and observations. Some entries were cryptic, while others detailed specific incidents involving names and locations she didn't recognize. There were also Polaroid photos, tucked between the pages, showing Daniel with unfamiliar faces. Each person wore a badge pinned to their jacket, bearing the insignia of an organization Emily had never heard of. The Veil. "What is this?" Emily asked, holding up one of the photos. Her parents exchanged nervous glances before her father finally spoke. "That's the group Daniel was investigating," he explained. Well, let's just say they're not the kind of people you want to cross. Powerful, ruthless, and connected to some very influential figures." Emily's mind raced as she processed this information. If Daniel had been investigating them, then whoever sent her the anonymous note must have known about his work. Could it be someone trying to help her uncover the truth? Or was it a trap meant to lure her deeper into danger? Either way, she couldn't ignore it. She owed it to Daniel to find out what really happened to him. Over the next few hours, Emily sifted through the rest of the materials, piecing together fragments of her brother's story. One document caught her attention, a contract signed by her father, agreeing to pay a substantial sum of money to the Veil in exchange for Daniel's safety. Another file contained bank statements showing large transfers between her family's account and accounts belonging to members of the organization. It was clear that her parents had sacrificed everything to protect Daniel, but at what cost? As the night wore on, Emily's resolve hardened. She couldn't stay in this town any longer, surrounded by lies and half-truths. She needed to follow the trail Daniel had left behind, no matter where it led. Gathering the documents and journals, she packed them carefully into her bag. Her parents watched silently, their expressions a mix of fear and resignation. They knew there was no stopping her now. Before leaving, Emily turned to face them one last time. "I'm going to find him," she said, her voice firm. "And I'm going to make sure justice is served for Daniel and for all of us." Without waiting for a response, she walked out the door, the weight of her mission pressing down on her shoulders but also fueling her determination. As she drove away from the house, Emily allowed herself a moment to reflect. 10 years ago, she had lost her brother, or so she thought. Now she had a chance to bring him back, to rewrite the ending of their story. But finding Daniel wouldn't be easy. The road ahead was fraught with danger, secrets, and betrayal. Yet, as daunting as it seemed, Emily knew she couldn't turn back. For the first time in years, she felt alive, not because she had found closure, but because she had found purpose. The next morning, Emily woke up with a sense of urgency coursing through her veins. She had spent the night in a small motel on the outskirts of town, unable to return to her parents' house after the confrontation. The discovery of Daniel's belongings and the confession from her parents had left her mind swirling with questions, emotions, and possibilities. As she sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the bag containing the journals, photos, and documents, she realized that this wasn't just about finding her brother anymore. It was about uncovering the truth behind the lies that had shaped her family for over a decade. With a deep breath, Emily spread the contents of the bag across the motel room table. The first thing she picked up was one of Daniel's journals. Its cover was worn, its pages yellowed with age. Opening it, she found herself immediately drawn into her brother's world. His handwriting was neat, but hurried, as though he'd been scribbling notes in a rush. Each entry began with a date, followed by cryptic phrases like, "Met with subject A," or "Followed lead to warehouse 12. At first glance, it seemed like Daniel had been conducting some kind of investigation, jotting down observations and piecing together clues. But what exactly had he been looking into, and why had it put him and their family in such grave danger? As she flipped through the pages, certain names began to appear repeatedly. Marcus Hale, Lila Vega, Victor Kane. These were likely members of the Veil, the mysterious organization, tied to the badges in the Polaroid photos. Some entries included sketches, maps of buildings, symbols resembling corporate logos, and even diagrams of security systems. It was clear that Daniel hadn't stumbled upon this group by accident. He had deliberately infiltrated them, gathering evidence along the way. One passage stood out to Emily more than the others. "I think I've uncovered something bigger than I ever imagined. If I can prove what they're doing, I might be able to bring them down. But they're watching me now. I feel it. Every step I take feels heavier, like I'm walking on thin ice. I don't know who to trust anymore, not even my own family." Reading those words sent a chill down Emily's spine. Her brother had known he was being watched, yet he continued his mission anyway. Was that bravery or recklessness? Either way, it painted a picture of Daniel far different from the carefree sibling she remembered. He had become someone willing to risk everything for the sake of exposing the truth. Among the papers, Emily also found a series of photographs. Most featured Daniel alongside individuals wearing the same badges. In one photo, he stood next to a man with sharp features and cold eyes, Victor Kane, judging by the name scrawled on the back of the image. Another showed him sitting in what appeared to be a dimly lit meeting room, surrounded by stacks of files and laptops. The expressions on everyone's faces were grim, almost conspiratorial. It was unsettling to see her brother in such an environment, knowing how much danger he must have been in. But the most shocking item came when Emily unfolded a crumpled piece of paper tucked inside one of the journals. It was a contract, a legal agreement between her father and the Veil. The terms were chilling. In exchange for Daniel's safety, her parents agreed to pay a staggering sum of money and remain silent about the organization's activities. There was even a clause stating that any attempt to expose the Veil would result in severe consequences for both Daniel and their family. Emily's hands trembled as she read the fine print. This wasn't just bribery, it was blackmail. Her parents hadn't simply given up Daniel. They had sold him off to protect themselves. For a moment, anger flared within her. How could they have done this? How could they have let fear dictate their choices, sacrificing their son in the process? But as quickly as the anger rose, it faded, replaced by sadness. They hadn't acted out of malice. They had acted out of love, however. Misguided it may have been, still the betrayal stung deeply. Emily couldn't imagine what it must have felt like for Daniel to learn that his own family had struck a deal with the very people he was trying to take down. Determined to find more answers, Emily turned her attention to the documents detailing financial transactions. Bank statements revealed large sums of money moving between accounts linked to the Vale and prominent figures in the community. Business owners, politicians, even law enforcement officials. It was a web of corruption so vast and intricate that Emily struggled to comprehend it all. Yet one thing was clear. The Vale wasn't just a shadowy organization operating on the fringes of society. It was embedded in the fabric of their town, influencing decisions, silencing dissent, and profiting from illegal activities. No wonder they had gone to such lengths to silence Daniel. As the hours passed, Emily began connecting the dots. Based on Daniel's notes and the evidence before her, it seemed he had been working undercover, gathering intel to expose the Vale's operations. Perhaps he had planned to hand over the information to authorities, or maybe he intended to release it publicly. Whatever his plan, it had clearly made him a target. The staged accident hadn't been meant to kill him. It had been designed to remove him from the equation, to send him into hiding where he couldn't cause trouble. But the question remained. Where was he now? Emily's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the motel door. Her heart skipped a beat. Who could possibly know she was here? Slowly she approached the door and peered through the peephole. To her relief, it was only the motel manager, holding a small envelope. "This was slipped under the office door for you," he said gruffly before turning away. Emily closed the door and examined the envelope. Like the first note she had received, there was no return address, just her name written in the same neat handwriting. Inside was another message, shorter this time. "Go to the warehouse. Look for the red file cabinet." Her pulse quickened. Whoever was sending these messages knew something important. Could it be Daniel himself, reaching out to guide her? Or was it someone else, perhaps an ally who had worked with him during his investigation? Regardless, Emily didn't have time to second guess. She needed to follow the lead. Grabbing her bag and slipping the documents back inside, Emily checked out of the motel and headed toward the address listed in Daniel's journal, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The drive took her past familiar landmarks, the park where she and Daniel used to play, the diner where they shared milkshakes after school, but none of it brought comfort. Instead, the memories served as reminders of everything she had lost, and everything she hoped to regain. When she arrived at the warehouse, the sight was bleak. The building loomed against the gray sky, its windows boarded up and its walls covered in graffiti. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, rusted and sagging in places. Emily parked her car a short distance away and cautiously approached the entrance. The air smelled faintly of dampness and decay, and the sound of her footsteps echoed eerily in the empty space. Pushing open the creaky metal door, she stepped inside. The interior was dimly lit, with shafts of light streaming through cracks in the ceiling. Dust particles floated lazily in the beams, giving the place an almost ghostly quality. Emily moved carefully, her eyes scanning the room for anything resembling a red file cabinet. After several minutes of searching, she spotted it tucked in the corner, partially hidden behind a stack of crates. Her heart raced as she pulled it open. Inside were folders filled with surveillance photos, audio recordings, and detailed reports documenting the Vale's activities. Emily sifted through them, her shock growing with each new revelation. The organization wasn't just involved in petty crimes. They were orchestrating major schemes, laundering money, trafficking goods, and manipulating local politics. It was horrifying, yet undeniable proof of the corruption Daniel had uncovered. But the most startling discovery came when Emily found a USB drive taped to the bottom of the drawer. Plugging it into her phone, She accessed a video file. As it played, her breath caught in her throat. It was Daniel speaking directly to the camera. His face was gaunt, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but his voice was steady. "If you're watching this, then I'm either dead or missing. First, I want you to know that I'm sorry for everything, for putting you in danger, for leaving, without saying goodbye. But I had no choice. What I've uncovered is bigger than me, bigger than our family. You need to finish what I started. Take this evidence to the press, to the police, anyone who will listen. Don't stop until justice is served. And if you can, find me." Tears streamed down Emily's face as the video ended. For 10 years, she had believed her brother was gone forever. Now she knew the truth. He was alive, or at least he had been when he recorded this message. Someone out there was protecting him or keeping him captive. Either way, she couldn't give up. Not now. Not when she was closer than ever to bringing him home. Clutching the USB drive tightly in her hand, Emily made a silent vow. She would expose the veil, no matter the risks. She would fight for justice, not just for Daniel, but for everyone who had suffered because of their crimes. And she would find her brother wherever he was. With renewed determination burning in her chest, Emily left the warehouse, ready to take the next step in her journey. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't stop until the truth came to light. Armed with the evidence from the warehouse and Daniel's heartfelt video message, Emily knew she couldn't tackle this alone. The scale of the Veil's operations was staggering, and exposing them wouldn't be easy. She needed allies, people, who could help her navigate the dangerous waters ahead. But whom could she trust? Her mind raced as she drove back to her motel, replaying everything she had learned over the past few days. One name stood out among the notes and documents: Lila Vega. Lila was mentioned several times in Daniel's journals, often in connection with key meetings or exchanges involving the Veil. Unlike some of the other members, Daniel described her as reluctant, someone who seemed uneasy about the organization's activities. Could Lila have been an unwilling participant? If so, maybe she would be willing to talk or at least point Emily in the right direction. The next morning, Emily set out to track down Lila Vega. Using the information from the files, she discovered that Lila owned a small art gallery in the Yam city. It was a risky move showing up unannounced, but Emily didn't have time for subtlety. When she arrived at the gallery, the space was quiet, filled with abstract paintings and sculptures bathed in soft lighting. A woman with dark hair tied back in a loose bun stood behind the counter, arranging pieces of pottery. Emily approached cautiously, trying to gauge whether this was indeed Lila. "Excuse me," Emily began, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside her. "Are you Lila Vega?" The woman looked up, startled. For a moment, recognition flickered across her face, though Emily couldn't understand why. "Yes, that's me," Lila replied, her tone guarded. "Can I help you?" Emily hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. She decided to start slow. "I'm looking for answers about something. Complicated. My brother was involved with the Veil, and I think you might know something about it." At the mention of the Veil, Lila visibly stiffened. Her eyes darted toward the door as if checking for eavesdroppers. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly, turning away to fiddle with a vase on the counter. Emily pressed on, sensing vulnerability beneath Lila's defensive exterior. "Please listen. My brother's life is at stake if he's even still alive. I found his journal, photos, recordings. He trusted you, or at least, he thought you weren't like the others. If there's anything you can tell me, anything at all, I need to hear it." For a long moment, Lila said nothing. Then, with a sigh, she gestured for Emily to follow her into a back room. Once they were seated, Lila spoke in a low, urgent voice. "You shouldn't be digging into this. It's not safe for you or anyone else. The Veil doesn't forgive mistakes. They'll destroy anyone who gets in their way." "I already know that," Emily replied firmly. "But I can't stop now, not when I'm so close to finding my brother." Lila studied her for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "Your brother. He was brave. Too brave, maybe. He got too close to uncovering things they wanted kept hidden. That's why they sent him away, but... She paused, glancing around nervously. There's more going on than just your brother. The Veil isn't just one group, it's part of something bigger. A network spreading across cities, countries, maybe even continents. Exposing them won't be easy. You'll need proof, undeniable proof, and a plan to get it out without getting killed. Emily listened intently, absorbing every word. Do you know where Daniel is? She asked finally. Lila hesitated again before answering. Not exactly, but I can tell you this. After they sent him away, he reached out to me once. He said he was laying low, waiting for the right moment to strike back. He gave me a location, a safe house outside the city. I never went there, but... She pulled out a scrap of paper and scribbled an address on it. If he's still alive, that's where you'll find him. Emily took the paper, gratitude swelling in her chest. Thank you, she said sincerely, and thank you for trusting me. Lila managed a faint smile. Be careful, okay? These people, they're monsters. They won't hesitate to hurt you if they think you're a threat. With that warning ringing in her ears, Emily left the gallery and headed straight for the address Lila had given her. The drive took her deep into the countryside, far from prying eyes. As she approached the safe house, a dilapidated cabin surrounded by dense woods, her heart pounded with anticipation. This was it, the place where Daniel might be hiding. She knocked on the door, holding her breath. At first, there was no response. Then slowly, the door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was a man who looked older than his years, his face lined with worry and exhaustion. But there was no mistaking those eyes. They were Daniel's. Daniel? Emily whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. He stared at her for a moment, disbelief written all over his face. Then, recognition dawned, and he pulled her into a tight embrace. Emily, he murmured, his voice cracking. I thought I'd never see you again. They sat together inside the cabin, catching up on 10 years' worth of secrets and struggles. Daniel explained how he had gone underground after learning about the Veil's true reach. He had continued gathering evidence, hoping to build a case strong enough to bring them down. But staying hidden had taken its toll, isolating him from everyone he loved, including his family. You should have told us, Emily said softly. We could have helped you. No, Daniel replied firmly. It was better this way. I couldn't risk putting you in danger. But now that you're here... He trailed off, his expression hardening. We can finish what we started. Together. Over. The next few days, Emily and Daniel worked tirelessly, compiling the evidence they had gathered and formulating a plan to expose the Veil. They knew they couldn't rely solely on traditional channels. Many law enforcement agencies were likely compromised. Instead, they decided to leak the information to independent journalists and activists known for taking on powerful institutions. As they prepared to execute their plan, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Shadows seemed to linger longer than usual, and unfamiliar cars occasionally passed by the cabin. Still, she refused to let fear paralyze her. They were so close to justice, to freedom, that backing down wasn't an option. Finally, the day came to release the evidence. With trembling hands, Emily uploaded the files to secure servers, ensuring they would reach multiple outlets simultaneously. As soon as the data hit the internet, the world exploded with outrage. News outlets picked up the story, exposing the Veil's crimes and naming names. Arrests followed swiftly, sending shockwaves through the community. But the victory wasn't without cost. Just hours after the leak, armed men arrived at the cabin searching for Daniel and Emily. The siblings barely escaped, fleeing into the woods under cover of darkness. Though shaken, they vowed to keep fighting until every last member of the Veil was brought to justice. As they disappeared into the forest hand in hand, Emily felt a surge of hope. For the first time in years, she believed they could truly rewrite their story, not as victims, but as survivors. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, The narrow escape from the cabin left Emily and Daniel physically exhausted but emotionally charged. They had barely evaded capture, running through the dense woods under the cover of darkness as flashlights swept the trees behind them. Every snapped twig and rustling leaf seemed like a death knell, yet they pressed on, driven by sheer willpower. When they finally collapsed in a hidden clearing miles away, their breaths came in ragged gasps, their hearts pounding wildly. "We can't stay here," Daniel whispered, his voice hoarse from exertion. "They'll find us if we don't keep moving." Emily nodded, though her body screamed for rest. The adrenaline coursing through her veins kept her alert, reminding her that stopping now meant giving up. And she wasn't about to let the veil win. She glanced at her brother, noticing how much he had changed over the years. His once carefree demeanor was replaced by a hardened edge, his eyes carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much. Yet, beneath it all, she could still see glimpses of the boy she grew up with, the one who always believed in doing what was right no matter the cost. "Where do we go next?" Emily asked, pulling herself to her feet. Her legs felt weak, but determination fueled each step forward. Daniel hesitated, scanning their surroundings. "There's an old friend I trust, someone who helped me when I first went into hiding. We can head to his place, but it's risky, if the Veil knows about him." "They won't stop until they silence us completely," Emily finished, her voice firm despite the fear creeping into her chest. "We have to take the risk." With renewed resolve, they set off again, navigating the forest by the light of the moon. After hours of walking, they finally reached the outskirts of a small town where Daniel's contact lived. It was a quiet, unassuming place, its streets lined with modest homes and flickering lamplights. As they approached a weathered house at the end of a cul-de-sac, Daniel signaled for Emily to wait while he knocked softly on the door. A moment later, a middle-aged man with graying hair and wary eyes answered. He recognized Daniel immediately and ushered them inside without a word. The interior of the house was cluttered but cozy, filled with books and maps scattered across tables and shelves. The man introduced himself as Greg, a former investigative journalist who had gone off the grid after uncovering corruption within powerful circles. "You shouldn't have come here," Greg said bluntly, closing the curtains and locking the door behind them. "This is exactly the kind of thing the Veil monitors." "We didn't have a choice," Daniel replied. "We exposed their operations, but they're hunting us now. We need your help to disappear, for good." Greg sighed, rubbing his temples. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest. Exposing the Veil was bold, but it comes with consequences. You two are marked. There's no going back to normal life. Not unless you want to spend the rest of your days looking over your shoulder." Emily stepped forward, her voice steady. "We didn't do this for ourselves. We did it for everyone they've hurt, including our family. If we stop now, everything we've worked for will be for nothing." Greg studied her for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "All right. But you'll need new identities, safe locations, and resources to survive. And even then, there are no guarantees." Over the next few days, Greg helped them plan their next move. He provided fake IDs, cash, and instructions on how to lay low while continuing to gather evidence against the Veil. Though grateful for his assistance, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that their fight was far from over. Every knock on the door or unfamiliar car passing by made her jump, her nerves stretched taut like piano strings. One evening, as they sat around the kitchen table discussing strategies, Emily turned to Daniel. "What happens after this? Even if we manage to stay hidden, the Veil isn't going to just disappear. They'll regroup, reorganize, and keep operating under different names. How do we stop them for good?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "It's not just about taking down individuals. It's about dismantling the system that allows groups like the Veil to exist. Corruption thrives because people look the other way. To truly break the cycle, we need to shine a light on it. Make it impossible for anyone to ignore." "And how do we do that?" Emily pressed, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "We're two people against an entire network. What difference can we possibly make?" Daniel met her gaze, his eyes blazing with conviction. "By inspiring others to join the fight. The truth has power, Em. Once people know what's really happening, they'll demand change. It might take time, but every movement starts with a spark. His words resonated with her, reigniting her determination. They weren't just fighting for themselves or their family. They were fighting for something bigger: justice, accountability, and the hope of a better future. As the days passed, Emily and Daniel prepared to part ways temporarily. Their plan involved splitting up to cover more ground, gathering additional evidence while laying false trails to throw the veil off their scent. It was a dangerous gamble, but staying together would only increase their chances of being caught. The morning of their departure, Emily hugged Daniel tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Promise me you'll stay safe," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I promise," Daniel replied, his own eyes glistening. "And you do the same. No matter what happens, we finish this together." With heavy hearts, they went their separate ways, each carrying half of the burden and half of the hope that had defined their journey so far. For Emily, the road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and sacrifice. But as she drove toward her assigned destination, she clung to the belief that their efforts would pay off. Someday, somehow, they would bring the veil to its knees. Meanwhile, Daniel traveled to a remote mountain town, meeting with informants and piecing together fragments of information that could lead to the organization's upper echelons. Each clue brought him closer to unraveling the full extent of the veil's influence, but it also put him deeper into harm's way. Late one night, as he pored over documents in a rented cabin, he received a chilling message. "We know what you're doing. Stop now or suffer the consequences." Instead of backing down, Daniel doubled his efforts, knowing that fear was exactly what the veil wanted to instill. He reached out to trusted allies, sharing encrypted files and coordinating leaks to ensure the truth continued spreading. With each revelation, public outrage grew louder, forcing authorities to take action against those implicated in the scandal. Back in her own mission, Emily faced similar threats. Shadows followed her everywhere, anonymous notes warning her to abandon her quest. But instead of succumbing to fear, she channeled it into fuel for her fight. She connected with grassroots organizations and whistleblower networks, amplifying their voices and building momentum for systemic change. Despite the constant danger, both siblings found strength in the knowledge that they weren't alone anymore. Their actions had sparked a movement, uniting ordinary people who refused to remain silent in the face of injustice. Together, they formed a coalition dedicated to exposing corruption wherever it lurked. Months passed, and the tide began to turn. Key members of the Veil were arrested, their assets seized and connections exposed. Public pressure forced lawmakers to enact reforms aimed at increasing transparency and accountability. While the organization itself wasn't entirely eradicated, its grip on power weakened significantly, a testament to the resilience of those who dared to stand against it. Finally, after months of separation, Emily and Daniel reunited at a secluded cabin nestled in the mountains. Exhausted but triumphant, they embraced, knowing they had accomplished something extraordinary. The scars of their journey would never fully fade, but neither would the pride of having fought for what was right. As they sat by the fire, watching the flames dance, Emily looked at her brother and smiled. "Do you think we've done enough?" she asked quietly. Daniel shook his head, his expression resolute. "No, but we've started something that can't be stopped. Justice doesn't happen overnight. It's a battle fought one step at a time, and we've taken the first steps." With those words echoing between them, they knew their fight wasn't over, but for the first time in years, they allowed themselves to feel a glimmer of peace. The road ahead would still be challenging, but they faced it together with courage, determination, and the unwavering belief that truth would ultimately prevail. Months had passed since Emily and Daniel reunited in the secluded mountain cabin, their bond stronger than ever despite the trials they had endured. The world outside was changing, slowly, painfully, but undeniably. The exposé of the Veil had ignited a firestorm of public outrage, leading to arrests, investigations, and calls for reform. Yet even as justice began to take root, both siblings knew that true peace would require more than just dismantling one corrupt organization. It demanded healing, not only for themselves but also for their fractured family. One crisp autumn morning, Emily stood on the porch of the cabin, sipping coffee as she watched the sun rise over the horizon. The air smelled of pine and fresh earth, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension of the past year. She felt lighter now, though scars remained etched into her soul. For so long she had carried the weight of unanswered questions, anger, and grief. Now finally she could breathe again, but it came at a cost. Trusting others still felt impossible, and the fear of betrayal lingered like a shadow at the edges of her mind. Daniel joined her moments later, leaning against the railing with a weary smile. "You think Mom and Dad will ever forgive us?" he asked softly, his voice tinged with sadness. Emily hesitated before answering. Their parents' decision to stage Daniel's death and strike a deal with the Veil had saved him, but it had also torn their family apart. Emily had struggled to reconcile her feelings of love and resentment, understanding and bitterness. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "But maybe forgiveness isn't the point anymore. Maybe what matters is whether we can move forward, together." Her words hung in the air between them, heavy, yet hopeful. They decided it was time to return home, not to seek absolution but to rebuild the bridges that had been burned. Packing up their belongings, they drove back to the town where they grew up, each mile bringing a mix of nostalgia and apprehension. The streets looked different this time, less menacing, more familiar. Even the house seemed smaller somehow, its white walls glowing softly in the afternoon light. When they knocked on the door, their mother answered almost immediately, her face pale with shock. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched, taut, filled with unspoken emotions. Then, without warning, she pulled Emily into a tight embrace, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're alive," she whispered, clutching her daughter as if afraid she might vanish. When she turned to Daniel, her legs buckled, and she collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Their father appeared moments later, his expression unreadable at first, but when he saw Daniel standing there alive and whole, his composure crumbled. He stepped forward hesitantly, then wrapped his arms around his son, his shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice breaking. "We thought we were doing the right thing. We never wanted to lose you." For hours they sat together in the living room, talking through everything, the lies, the guilt, the sacrifices. It wasn't easy. Old wounds reopened, raw and painful, but they faced them head on, refusing to let fear dictate their conversation. Emily explained how she had uncovered the truth about Daniel's disappearance, while Daniel recounted his years in hiding and the fight to expose the Veil. Their parents listened silently, their faces etched with remorse. "We didn't mean to hurt you," their mother said eventually, her voice trembling. "We were scared and terrified of losing both of you. We thought we were protecting our family, but instead we destroyed it." "You did protect me," Daniel interjected gently. "Without your deal, I wouldn't be here today. But keeping secrets doesn't fix anything. It only makes things worse." His words struck a chord resonating deeply with everyone in the room. Slowly, tentatively, they began to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. It wouldn't happen overnight. It would take time, effort, and countless difficult conversations, but they were willing to try. For the first time in years, they felt like a family again. Over the following weeks, Emily and Daniel worked alongside their parents to heal old wounds and create new memories. They cleaned out the attic together, rediscovering forgotten treasures from their childhood. Photo albums, toys, and mementos that brought smiles to their faces. One evening, they gathered around the fireplace, flipping through pictures and sharing stories. Laughter echoed through the house, mingling with the occasional tear, as they embraced the bittersweet beauty of reconciliation. But healing wasn't limited to their immediate family. Word of their bravery spread throughout the community. inspiring others to speak out against corruption and injustice. Local activists organized rallies, demanding accountability from those who had enabled the Veil's activities. Journalists dug deeper, uncovering additional layers of deceit and abuse of power. Though progress was slow, the momentum continued to grow, fueled by the courage of ordinary people standing up for what was right. As winter approached, Emily and Daniel made plans to continue their work, albeit in a quieter, more sustainable way. They realized they couldn't save the world overnight, but they could contribute to lasting change, one step at a time. Together, they founded an organization dedicated to supporting whistleblowers and advocating for transparency. It started small, operating out of a modest office in town, but soon gained traction, attracting volunteers and donors eager to join the cause. Their journey wasn't without challenges. Threats persisted, reminders that powerful forces still sought to silence them, but they refused to be intimidated. Instead, they leaned on each other, drawing strength from their shared experiences and unwavering determination. They celebrated victories, no matter how small, and learned to cope with setbacks, knowing that resilience was key to achieving their goals. On Christmas Eve, the Dawson family gathered around the tree, exchanging gifts and enjoying each other's company. It was the first holiday they had spent together in over a decade, and the significance wasn't lost on any of them. As they laughed and talked, Emily glanced around the room, taking in the sight of her loved ones. Her parents, older and wiser. Her brother, alive and thriving. Despite everything they had endured, they had found their way back to each other. Later that night, as snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, Emily stepped outside for some fresh air. Daniel joined her moments later, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Do you think we'll ever stop fighting?" he asked, his breath visible in the cold air. "Probably not," Emily replied with a small smile. "But that's okay. Fighting for justice, for truth. It's worth it. And besides, we've got each other. That makes all the difference." Daniel nodded, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the stars above. "Yeah, no matter what happens, we finish this together." As they stood side by side, watching the snow blanket the ground in pristine white, they allowed themselves a moment of quiet reflection. The road ahead would still be challenging, fraught with obstacles and uncertainties. But they faced it with hope, knowing they weren't alone. Together, they had uncovered the truth, confronted their fears, and rebuilt their lives. And together, they would continue striving for a better future, for themselves, their family, and the world. In the end, their story wasn't just about survival or revenge. It was about redemption, resilience, and the enduring power of love. It was about finding light in the darkest corners and holding on to it, even when the shadows threatened to consume them. Emily and Daniel had proven that no matter how deep the wounds or how heavy the burden, the human spirit could endure and triumph.